Welcome, dear listener, to a journey back through time, back more than 4 centuries, to the edge of the known world, to a small island off the coast of what would become North Carolina, to a place where more than 100 English men, women and children simply vanished, leaving behind only a single word carved into a wooden post and one of history's most enduring mysteries. Before we embark on this voyage across ocean and time, I invite you to settle yourself comfortably. Adjust your pillows, draw your blankets close around you, take a slow, deep breath in, hold it for a moment, then release it slowly, letting the day's tensions flow away with your breath. This is a story for drifting, for releasing, for allowing the past to wash over you like gentle waves upon a shore. If you find comfort in these historical journeys, please press like. If you wish to explore more mysteries and forgotten moments with me, subscribe and share your thoughts. Your presence here enriches this space, makes these old stories live again. Now, let us step back through the centuries, back to 1587, to Elizabethan England, to an age of exploration and ambition, to a time when the New World was truly new, when maps had vast blank spaces, when the coast of America was an edge beyond which anything might exist. Let us follow the colonists who sailed west toward uncertainty, toward hope, toward a fate that no one could have predicted and that we still cannot fully explain. England, 1587. The preparation. In the England of 1587, the world was expanding in ways that would have seemed impossible just a century earlier. Spanish and Portuguese explorers had sailed to the Americas, to Africa, to Asia, had brought back tales of gold and spices, of lands rich and strange, of peoples and creatures never before imagined. The Spanish in particular had grown wealthy beyond measure from their New World conquests, their galleons carrying silver and gold back across the Atlantic, funding an empire that threatened to dominate all of Europe. England, under Queen Elizabeth I, watched this Spanish expansion with a mixture of envy and alarm. The Spanish were Catholic, England was Protestant, and the religious conflicts of the era made every territorial gain by Spain a potential threat to England's security and independence. Moreover, England wanted its share of the New World's riches, wanted colonies of its own, wanted to establish a presence in America before the Spanish claimed everything of value. Several earlier attempts had been made. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh had sponsored an expedition that established a small military outpost on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. That settlement had been abandoned after a year, the colonists returning to England with Sir Francis Drake, reporting that the island was difficult to supply, that relations with the local native peoples were strained, that survival in this new land was harder than anyone had anticipated. But Raleigh was not discouraged. He had been granted a charter by Queen Elizabeth to establish colonies in the New World, to claim lands for England, to find a foothold from which English power could expand. He began planning a new expedition, this time not a military outpost, but a true colony, with families, with women and children, with people committed to making permanent homes in America rather than soldiers planning to return to England as soon as possible. The leader of this new expedition would be John White, an artist and gentleman who'd been part of the 1585 expedition, who'd made detailed drawings of the land and its native inhabitants, who knew the challenges but believed they could be overcome with proper planning and commitment. White was not a military man, not a soldier or adventurer in the traditional sense, but rather a careful, observant person who believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence with the native peoples, who saw America not as territory to be conquered, but as land to be shared, to be settled, to be made productive through English industry and organization. White recruited colonists throughout the spring and summer of 1587. They came from London and from smaller towns, from various trades and stations in life, drawn by different motives, but united in their willingness to leave England, to cross a vast and dangerous ocean, to establish new lives in a land they'd never seen. Some were craftsmen, carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, people with skills needed to build a settlement from nothing. Others were farmers, experienced in agriculture, ready to clear land and plant crops, to create the food supply the colony would need to survive. There were families among the colonists, husband and wives, some with children, some women pregnant and knowing they would give birth in the new world. This was remarkable for the time, for earlier expeditions had been almost entirely male, but White insisted on families, on women and children, believing that only a true community with all ages and both sexes could succeed where a military outpost had failed. Among the colonists was White's own daughter, Eleanor, married to Ananias Dare, a bricklayer and tiler from London. Eleanor was pregnant, due to give birth within months of the planned arrival in America. She would become part of the colony's story in a way neither she nor her father could have imagined. Her child destined to bear a name that would echo through American history. The colonists gathered in Plymouth in the spring of 1587, bringing their possessions, their tools, their hopes. They were a company of some 115 people, including women and children, the largest group yet to attempt permanent settlement in English America. They were ordinary people mostly, not wealthy, not titled, not the sort who normally made their way into history books. But they were brave, or desperate, or optimistic enough to risk everything on this venture, to leave behind the familiar hardships of England for the unknown hardships of America. The supplies they brought reflected both their ambitions and their understanding of the challenges ahead. There were tools for building and farming, axes, saws, hammers, plows, hoes, spades. There were seeds for planting, wheat, barley, peas, beans, various vegetables. There were weapons for hunting and defense, muskets, pistols, swords, armor. There were trade goods for dealing with native peoples, copper, beads, metal tools, cloth. There were basic necessities, salt for preserving food, medicines, cooking pots, blankets, clothing enough for the first year at least. The ships that would carry them were typical of the era, wooden sailing vessels, cramped and uncomfortable, dependent entirely on wind for propulsion, carrying passengers and cargo in holds that were dark, damp, and often foul-smelling. The flagship was a vessel of perhaps 100 tons, accompanied by smaller pinnaces and boats. These ships would be the colonists' homes for the 3-month voyage across the Atlantic, would be their only connection to England until supply ships could be sent the following year. In early May 1587, the ships departed Plymouth, sailing west-southwest, following the route that was becoming standard for Atlantic crossings. South first to catch the trade winds, then west across open ocean, then northwest toward the American coast. The colonists watched England recede behind them, saw the last of their homeland disappear beyond the horizon, knew they were committed now, that turning back was not an option, that ahead lay either success and new life or failure and possible death. The voyage stretched ahead of them, 3,000 miles of ocean, 3 months of sailing, and then whatever waited on the other side. Some colonists stood at the rails watching the water, thinking of what they'd left behind, what they'd given up, what they hoped to find. Others were already sick, succumbing to seasickness, to the motion of the ship, to the close quarters and poor ventilation below decks. Parents held children who cried or who'd gone silent with fear and confusion, who didn't understand why home had been left behind, why they were trapped on this wooden thing that moved constantly and made strange creaking sounds. John White stood on deck, looking west toward where America lay beyond the horizon, thinking about his daughter, about the grandchild soon to be born, about the colony he would lead, about the responsibility he'd taken on. He was optimistic, believed the colony would succeed, believed they'd learn from the mistakes of 1585, believed that with proper management and peaceful relations with the natives, an English settlement could thrive in America. He had no way of knowing that within 3 years he would return to find the settlement empty. Every person vanished. No bodies, no clear evidence of what had happened. Only that single carved word that would baffle historians for centuries. He had no way of knowing that the colonists he led, the families he'd recruited, his own daughter and grandchild, would all disappear into one of history's most enduring mysteries. But that knowledge lay in the future. In May 1587, the ships sailed west. The colonists tried to settle into the voyage, and America waited, silent and unknown, for the arrival of these English men, women, and children who believed they were coming to build a new world. The voyage across life aboard the ships during the Atlantic crossing was difficult in ways that modern people struggle to comprehend. The vessels were small, perhaps 80 to 100 feet long, carrying not just the colonists, but also supplies, livestock, crew, and all the provisions needed for a 3-month voyage. Space was at a premium, measured in inches rather than feet, with passengers packed into holds that were dark, airless, and constantly damp from seawater that worked its way through the hull planking. The colonists slept in shifts, multiple people sharing small spaces, adults and children pressed together, privacy a concept that simply didn't exist. The air below decks was thick and foul, smelling of unwashed bodies, of vomit from those suffering seasickness, of bilge water that sloshed in the bottom of the ship, of animals kept in pens, of food slowly spoiling in the heat and damp. Ventilation was minimal, relying on small hatches that had to be closed during storms, leaving the holds in complete darkness with air so thick it was difficult to breathe. Food on the voyage was monotonous and often unpleasant. The diet consisted mainly of ship's biscuit, hardtack that was more stone than bread, that had to be soaked in water or beer to make it soft enough to chew. That was often full of weevils and other insects that had to be picked out or simply ignored and eaten. There was salted meat, beef or pork preserved in brine, tough and salty, and nothing like fresh meat, requiring long soaking and boiling to make it even marginally palatable. There were dried peas and beans, dried fish, cheese that grew moldy in the damp, beer and water that were the only beverages available. Fresh water was a constant concern. The barrels of water brought aboard at Plymouth began to grow stale and foul-tasting within weeks, developing a green scum that had to be skimmed off, acquiring a taste that made drinking it an act of will rather than pleasure. Beer kept somewhat better, the mild alcohol content inhibiting spoilage, and many passengers, including children, drank beer rather than water for the entire voyage. The motion of the ship was unceasing. Even in calm seas, there was constant movement, a rolling and pitching that never entirely stopped. That made walking difficult, that made eating a challenge as plates and cups slid across tables, that made sleep fitful as people had to brace themselves against the ship's motion. In rough seas, when storms came through, the motion became violent, throwing people against bulkheads, causing injuries, making even the simplest tasks dangerous. During storms, everyone had to stay below, hatches battened down, in complete darkness, except for the faint light of carefully shielded candles, listening to the wind scream and the ship groan, wondering if the next wave would be the one that broke the ship apart and sent them all to the bottom. Seasickness affected almost everyone in the first days, some recovering quickly, others suffering for weeks or even the entire voyage. The constant motion upset stomachs, made heads spin, caused nausea that was made worse by the foul air and limited ability to get fresh air and sunlight. Those who were sick added to the unpleasantness of the holds, vomiting into buckets that couldn't always be emptied immediately, contributing to the smell and the misery. Children suffered particularly. They couldn't understand why they were trapped on this moving, creaking wooden world, why they couldn't run and play as they had on land, why their parents seemed worried and short-tempered, why everything was hard and uncomfortable and scary. Parents did their best to comfort them, to create games and distractions, to tell stories that made the journey seem like an adventure rather than an ordeal. But children cried, grew sick, some died during the crossing from disease or injury, their small bodies committed to the ocean with brief prayers and heavy hearts. Yet there were moments of beauty too, moments when the hardships receded, and something of the voyage's wonder came through. On calm evenings, passengers could come on deck, could breathe fresh air, could see the sun setting over an ocean that stretched unbroken to every horizon, could watch dolphins playing in the bow wave, could see the stars emerge in skies unpolluted by any land-based light, brilliant and numerous beyond anything they'd ever seen in England. The sailors, those who crewed the ship and knew the sea, became familiar figures to the passengers. They worked constantly, climbing the rigging to adjust sails, manning the helm to keep the ship on course, maintaining the pumps that kept the bilge water from rising too high, repairing the countless small problems that arose on any long voyage. They sang work songs to coordinate their efforts, hauling on ropes in unison, the music providing rhythm and making the labor slightly less burdensome. The passengers listened to these songs, learned some of them, found comfort in the routine and competence of the crew. John White spent much of the voyage on deck when weather permitted, sketching and making notes, observing the ocean and its creatures, recording the voyage's progress for the reports he would need to make to his sponsors. He consulted with the ship's master about their position, about winds and currents, about when they might expect to make landfall. He checked on the colonists, speaking with families, offering encouragement, trying to maintain morale despite the voyage's hardships. Eleanor Dare, White's pregnant daughter, spent much time below, unable to move easily on deck, uncomfortable in the close quarters, but making the best of it. Other women helped her, created what comfort they could, talked about what life would be like in the new world, about the homes they would build, the gardens they would plant, the new lives they would create in America. These conversations were part hope, part prayer, part desperate need to believe that the hardships of the voyage would be worthwhile, that something better waited at the end. As the weeks passed, the voyage settled into routine. Days blended together, marked only by mealtimes and sleep periods, and the slow progress across the ocean. The sailors took sun sights at noon when weather allowed, calculating the ship's position, announcing that they were making good time, that the winds were favorable, that landfall should come within the expected time frame. In late June or early July, after more than 2 months at sea, signs of land began to appear. Seabirds were spotted, species that didn't range far from shore, their presence indicating that land was near. The color of the water changed, from the deep blue of open ocean to greenish tints suggesting shallower depths. Floating vegetation appeared, seaweed and plant matter that had washed out from river mouths. The smell of the air changed, carrying hints of land, of vegetation, of something other than endless salt water. Then, one morning, a lookout called down from the masthead, "Land ho!" On the western horizon, a thin line separated ocean from sky, a darker smudge that was neither cloud nor imagination, but solid earth, the coast of America, the New World, the destination they'd been sailing toward for 3 months. The colonists crowded on deck, staring west, trying to see this land they'd heard so much about, this America that would be their new home. It was too distant yet to make out details, just a dark line on the horizon. But it was real, was there, was growing slowly larger as the ships sailed toward it. They had crossed the ocean. They had survived the voyage. Now the real challenge would begin, building a colony, creating homes, establishing themselves in this new land. The ships approached the coast cautiously, following it north, looking for the entrance to the sounds and islands where Roanoke lay. The shoreline was low and sandy, covered with scrubby vegetation, backed by forests that seemed to stretch inland forever. It looked wild, untamed, empty of any sign of European presence. This was America in 1587, vast, primeval, belonging to peoples who'd lived here for thousands of years, but which to English eyes looked like wilderness waiting to be civilized. They were looking for Roanoke Island, for the site where the 1585 expedition had built their fort, for the place that would be their settlement. The pilots who'd been there before scanned the coast, looking for landmarks, for the channels through the outer banks, for the way to reach their destination. And finally, in mid-July 1587, the ships entered the Sounds, sailed through relatively calm waters protected from the ocean by barrier islands, approached Roanoke Island itself. 3 months and more than 3,000 miles after leaving Plymouth, The colonists were about to set foot on the soil of the New World, about to begin the great experiment of permanent English settlement in America, about to begin the journey that would lead, somehow, some way, to their complete disappearance. Arrival at Roanoke Island. On July 22, 1587, the ships anchored off Roanoke Island, and the first boats began ferrying colonists and supplies to shore. The island was low-lying, perhaps 12 miles long and 3 miles wide, heavily forested, surrounded by the calm waters of Roanoke Sound on one side and the rougher waters near the Outer Banks on the other. It was isolated, defensible, had been chosen for the 1585 settlement precisely because it offered some protection from both Spanish ships and potentially hostile native peoples. The colonists came ashore with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief to be off the ship, to stand on ground that didn't move, to breathe air that didn't smell of bilge and vomit and too many bodies in too small a space. But apprehension too, because this island was now their home, because the ships would soon leave, because they were committed now to making this work, or perishing in the attempt. The first task was to locate the fort and buildings from the 1585 settlement. John White had been part of that earlier expedition, knew approximately where the structures had been built, led a party inland to find them. They walked through forest, following faint traces of paths, pushing through undergrowth that had reclaimed any cleared areas, calling out occasionally though expecting no answer, for the 1585 colonists had all returned to England the year before. They found the fort, or what remained of it. The defensive perimeter was still visible, the earthworks and wooden palisades still standing though beginning to decay, gaps appearing where posts had rotted or been pulled down. Inside the fort, the buildings were in various states of ruin. Some still had roofs, though many were damaged. Others were open to the sky, their thatch rotted away or blown off by storms. None were immediately habitable. All would need work, but the basic structures existed, would save weeks or months of labor that would have been needed to build everything from scratch. The colonists began making the settlement livable. Men cleared brush, repaired the palisade, patched roofs, rebuilt walls. Women swept out the buildings, cleaned away the debris and animal nests, began organizing spaces for living and storage. Children ran through the settlement, exploring, playing, their voices carrying through the forest, the first sounds of English childhood in this place in more than a year. The work was hard, but purposeful. Everyone had tasks, roles to play in making the settlement functional. Carpenters and builders focused on structural repairs. Farmers began clearing land for gardens and fields, removing trees and stumps, preparing soil for planting. Blacksmiths set up their forges. Women organized cooking and cleaning, established communal spaces for meals, began planning how to distribute supplies, and manage the resources they'd brought from England. The island itself was beautiful in its way. The forests were different from England's, filled with species they didn't recognize. Massive oak and cypress trees, strange pines, undergrowth of plants that looked almost familiar but weren't quite the same as English species. The air was thick and humid, far more so than England, heavy with moisture, making the heat seem more oppressive. Mosquitoes were numerous and aggressive, swarming from the marshes, biting constantly, making outdoor work miserable. Other insects too, species they didn't recognize, some biting, some just annoying in their numbers. The sound of the forest was a constant backdrop, birdsong from species they'd never heard before, the buzz and chirp of insects, the rustling of leaves in the ever-present breeze. At night, the sounds changed, frogs and night insects creating a chorus that was alien to English ears, occasional louder sounds suggesting larger animals moving through the forest, sounds that made the colonists nervous, made them wonder what creatures lived on this island, what dangers might emerge from the darkness. Water was abundant, at least. The island had creeks and springs, fresh water that tasted better than anything they'd drunk on the voyage, that could be collected easily, that meant at least one basic necessity was readily available. Fish were plentiful in the Sound. could be caught with nets and lines, would supplement their food supplies. Shellfish too, oysters and clams that could be gathered from the shores, that were safe to eat and helped vary their diet beyond the ship provisions they'd brought. But despite these resources, despite the beauty of the place, there was an underlying tension, a sense that they were not alone on this island, that they were being watched. The native peoples of the area, the CROATOAN and other Algonquian tribes, knew the island well, had known about the 1585 settlement, certainly knew about these new English arrivals. But they hadn't shown themselves, hadn't made contact, hadn't done anything to indicate whether they were friendly, hostile, or simply curious. John White knew that relations with the native peoples would be crucial to the colony's survival. The 1585 expedition had ended badly in this regard, with violence between English and natives, with distrust and fear on both sides. White wanted to do better, wanted to establish peaceful relations, to trade for food and information, to coexist rather than to conquer. But he couldn't establish relations if the natives wouldn't make contact, if they remained hidden in the forests, watching but not engaging. On July 28th, just 6 days after landing, White held a meeting with the colonists to discuss their situation. They needed to organize formally, to establish government, to create the structures of civil society that would let the colony function as a community rather than just a collection of individuals. White was designated governor, given authority to make decisions and settle disputes. Other men were appointed to various positions, assistants to help govern, militia leaders to organize defense, craftsmen designated to oversee construction projects. During this meeting, the colonists also discussed their concerns. Food supplies were adequate for now, but wouldn't last through a winter. They needed to plant crops immediately, though the season was already late for English planting schedules. They needed to establish better relations with native peoples, to arrange trade for corn and other local foods. They needed to prepare for winter, to ensure all buildings were weatherproof, that everyone would have adequate shelter when cold weather came. And they discussed supply ships. It was understood that ships would come from England the following year, bringing more supplies, more colonists, news from home. But a year was a long time. The colony needed to be self-sufficient enough to survive until those ships arrived, needed to plan as if help might be delayed, might not come exactly when expected. 2 days later, on July 30th, something wonderful happened, something that represented both hope for the colony and a deep irony given what would come. Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, gave birth to a daughter. The birth was difficult, as all births were in that era, but mother and child survived, and a baby's cry rang through the settlement, the first cry of an English child born in America. They named her Virginia, after the Virginia colony, after the land that was now her home. Virginia Dare, born on Roanoke Island, granddaughter of the governor, the first English child born in the New World. Her birth was celebrated by the colonists, seen as a good omen, as proof that this settlement could be more than just an outpost, could be a true colony where families lived and children were born, and English life could take root in American soil. John White held his newborn granddaughter, looked at her tiny face, and felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on his shoulders. This child, all the children in the colony, all the families, all the people who trusted him and followed him to this island, they were all depending on him to make this work, to keep them safe, to build something lasting. He had no way of knowing that within months he would be forced to leave them, that years would pass before he could return, that when he finally did come back, his granddaughter would be gone, vanished along with everyone else, leaving no trace except those mysterious carved letters that would puzzle generations to come. But in that moment, holding Virginia Dare, John White was simply a grandfather, happy and hopeful, believing in the colony's future, believing that this child would grow up here, would have children of her own, would be the first of countless generations of English Americans. The settlement on Roanoke Island was barely a week old. and already it had its first native-born citizen. The settlement takes shape. Through the rest of July and into August, the colony established its rhythms and routines, the patterns of daily life that would need to sustain them through the seasons ahead. Each day began at dawn, when the first light filtering through the trees signaled time to rise, to begin the endless work of survival in this new land. The men worked on construction and agriculture, the two most urgent tasks. Those with building skills continued repairing and improving the structures within the fort, replacing rotted timbers, rebuilding chimneys, improving roofs to better withstand the violent storms that apparently struck this coast with some regularity. They built new structures too, a storehouse for supplies, a workshop for the blacksmith, a meeting house where the colony could gather for decisions and religious services. The farmers cleared land beyond the fort, removing trees and stumps, breaking up soil that had never been cultivated, at least not by European methods. The work was backbreaking, done with axes and shovels and mattocks, each tree a challenge, each stump requiring hours of digging and chopping to remove. The cleared land was planted with seeds brought from England, wheat and barley for bread, peas and beans for protein, cabbage and turnips and other vegetables to vary their diet. They planted too late in the season by English standards, knew the harvest would be uncertain, but had no choice if they wanted food from their own fields before winter. The women organized the domestic side of the colony. They cooked communal meals, washed clothing, tended gardens near the houses where they grew herbs and vegetables that needed constant attention. They cared for children, a significant task given how many families had brought young ones. They preserved food, salting fish and meat, drying fruits and vegetables, preparing for winter when fresh food would be scarce. They sewed and mended, maintaining the clothing that would need to last until supply ships could bring more fabric and thread. Children, when not helping with chores, explored the island, played games, adapted to this new home with the flexibility of youth. They climbed trees, waded in the creeks, collected shells from the shores, created their own entertainment in a place that had no toys, no books, no diversions beyond what imagination could provide. The older children helped with real work. Boys assisted fathers with building and farming. Girls helped mothers with cooking and childcare. Childhood in 1587 was brief, responsibilities coming early, adult tasks expected, even from those barely past toddlerhood. The sound of the settlement became familiar, axes biting into wood, hammers driving nails, the rasp of saws, the ring of the blacksmith's anvil, voices calling to each other across the work sites, children's laughter, babies crying, the everyday sounds of a community taking shape. It was a small sound in the vast silence of the American forest, barely noticeable from any distance, but within the settlement, it represented life, activity, the slow progress of civilization being established in wilderness. Food was a constant concern. The supplies from England were diminishing, would run out within months. The colonists fished daily, catching enough to feed everyone but nothing extra, nothing that could be stored for later. They gathered shellfish, picked berries from bushes around the island, learned which plants were edible and which should be avoided. But these activities provided only part of what they needed. For real food security, they needed either successful harvests from their planted fields or trade with native peoples who knew this land, who grew corn and squash and beans, who could teach English farmers how to cultivate American soil. But the natives remained elusive. Occasionally, colonists would see signs of their presence. Smoke from distant fires, canoes spotted far across the sound, footprints on beaches that disappeared into the forest. But no one came to the settlement. No one initiated contact. No one offered the trade and friendship that White so desperately wanted to establish. This silence worried White and the other leaders. Why wouldn't the natives make contact? Were they hostile, planning some attack? Were they afraid of the English after the conflicts during the 1585 expedition? Were they simply waiting to see what these newcomers would do, whether they would prove friendly or dangerous? On August 9th, something happened that brought these concerns into sharp focus. George Howe, one of the colonists, went alone to the shore to catch crabs, wading in shallow water at some distance from the settlement. He was attacked by a group of native warriors, struck with arrows, his skull crushed with wooden war clubs. His body was found later, beaten and mutilated, left as a clear message that some native peoples at least were not friendly, were not interested in peaceful coexistence. The murder shocked the colony, shattered the fragile sense of security they'd been building. If a man could be killed within a mile of the settlement, if hostile natives were close enough to attack anyone who ventured out alone, then how could they work the fields, gather food, do all the tasks necessary for survival? The colony went on alert. Men were armed when they left the fort, guards were posted, work parties were larger and more cautious. White tried to make sense of the attack, to understand which tribe was responsible, whether this was a general native hostility or specific to certain groups. He sent messengers to try to contact friendly tribes, to explain that these new colonists were different from the 1585 expedition, that they wanted peace, that they hoped to trade and coexist. The messengers made contact with some native groups, delivered these messages, received polite but non-committal responses. The natives would consider the English presence, would decide what their relationship would be, but would not commit to anything immediately. As August continued, the reality of the colony's situation became increasingly clear. They were isolated, vulnerable, short on supplies, uncertain of their relationships with the peoples who controlled the surrounding lands. The crops they'd planted were growing, but wouldn't be ready for harvest until late September at the earliest. Winter was coming, would arrive in just a few months, and they were nowhere near ready for it. In this context, a difficult decision emerged. The colony needed help, needed supplies, needed tools and food and clothing that could only come from England. A ship needed to return, to explain the situation, to request immediate support. But who would go? And who would command that ship once it reached England, ensuring that the colony's needs were properly communicated to sponsors and authorities? The colonists met to discuss this question. Various names were proposed, various arguments made about who should go and who should stay. The debate continued for days, with no clear consensus emerging. Then someone proposed what seemed like an obvious solution. John White should go. He was the governor. He knew the sponsors. He could speak with authority about what the colony needed. He would be taken seriously by officials in London. White resisted. He was the governor. His place was with the colony, with his daughter and granddaughter, with all the people who'd followed him here. But the colonists insisted, argued that he was the one person who could ensure help came quickly, that his presence in England would make the difference between the colony's survival and failure. Eventually, reluctantly, White agreed. He would sail back to England on one of the ships that had brought them, would spend the winter there arranging supplies and reinforcements, would return in the spring of 1588 with everything the colony needed to survive and prosper. It would be a brief absence, 6 months at most, less time than the voyage out had taken. The colony could survive that long, would be stronger when he returned. On August 27, 1587, just over a month after arriving at Roanoke, John White boarded a ship preparing to return to England. He said goodbye to his daughter Eleanor, to his granddaughter Virginia, to all the colonists who would remain. He promised to return quickly, swore he would not abandon them, assured them that by next summer they would have everything they needed and the colony would thrive. The ship weighed anchor and began moving away from Roanoke Island, carrying White back toward England. He stood on deck watching the island recede, watching the colonists on shore grow smaller, watching until the island disappeared behind him, and there was nothing ahead but ocean. He had no way of knowing it would be 3 years before he returned. He had no way of knowing that when he finally did come back, the island would be empty. The colonists gone, vanished so completely, it was as if they'd never existed at all. Tensions and troubles, The month between the colony's landing and John White's departure had been filled with work and worry, with small triumphs and growing concerns, with the slow realization that survival in this new land would be far more difficult than anyone had imagined back in England. The murder of George Howe had cast a pall over the settlement, a shadow that couldn't be dispelled by any amount of work or optimism. The colonists now understood viscerally what they'd known intellectually. They were not alone on this island. They were not welcome by all the native peoples. They were vulnerable to attack, and the vast American wilderness that surrounded them held dangers they couldn't always see or predict. After Howe's death, the settlement's defensive posture changed. The palisade was strengthened, gaps filled, a proper gate constructed that could be closed and barred at night. Guards were posted at all times, men taking turns watching the approaches to the settlement, looking for any sign of hostile natives, ready to raise an alarm if danger appeared. Work parties going out to the fields or to gather food always included armed men, muskets primed and ready, swords loose in their scabbards. But the increased vigilance came at a cost. The work of building and farming slowed, because every task now required extra people for security, because fear made everyone more cautious, because the simple activities of daily life became fraught with anxiety. Men working in the fields constantly looked up, scanning the tree line for movement, jumping at sounds that might be nothing more than wind in the branches or animals moving through the underbrush. The women and children were largely confined to the settlement itself, forbidden from wandering far, restricted to areas that could be easily defended. This confinement was especially hard on the children, who'd been enjoying the freedom of exploring the island, who now found themselves limited to a few acres within and immediately around the fort. They adapted, as children do, found games to play in the restricted space, but the sense of fear and constraint affected them, made this new home feel less like an adventure and more like a prison. Relationships with nearby native groups remained tense and uncertain. White had tried to establish friendly contact with the CROATOAN tribe, who were believed to be less hostile than some others, who had maintained somewhat better relations with the 1585 expedition. A meeting was arranged on neutral ground, with colonists and CROATOAN representatives talking through interpreters, trying to establish some basis for coexistence. The CROATOAN were willing to talk but cautious, making no firm commitments, promising nothing concrete. They made it clear that they distinguished between these new colonists and the previous English settlement, which had earned their animosity through violence and broken promises. They would watch these new English, would see how they behaved, would decide over time whether friendship was possible. But they also warned that other tribes were less open to English presence, that some groups saw any Europeans as threats to be eliminated, that the attack on Howe had likely been carried out by natives who would strike again if opportunity presented. The CROATOAN couldn't or wouldn't offer protection, couldn't guarantee the colonists' safety, could only advise caution and suggest that the English not venture too far from their settlement without strong guards. This conversation, meant to ease tensions, actually increased the colonists' anxiety. If friendly tribes couldn't guarantee safety, if hostile groups were actively looking for opportunities to attack, if the English were essentially besieged in their own settlement, how could they survive? How could they farm, gather food, do all the things necessary for long-term survival if leaving the fort meant risking death? The crops that had been planted in late July and early August were growing, but their progress was uncertain. The colonists had no experience with American soil, American weather, American growing conditions. The plants looked different than they would have in England, grew at different rates, seemed either to struggle or flourish in ways that didn't match English expectations. Would there be a harvest? Would it be enough? No one could say with certainty, and that uncertainty gnawed at everyone. Food supplies from England were running low. By mid-August, the colonists were rationing carefully, making each meal stretch, trying to conserve what remained for the winter months, when hunting and gathering would become more difficult. Fish and shellfish helped, as did the wild plants and berries they learned to identify and harvest. But these sources were uncertain, seasonal, couldn't be relied upon completely. The reality was stark. The colony needed regular supply ships from England. They needed tools to replace those that broke or wore out. They needed clothing and shoes, and 1,000 small items that couldn't be made locally. They needed more people, needed the colony to grow, needed the strength and security that came with numbers. A settlement of 115 people was too small, too vulnerable, too dependent on every individual remaining healthy and alive. This was the context in which John White's departure was decided. The colony was not failing exactly, but it wasn't thriving either. It was surviving day to day, making slow progress, but always aware of how precarious their situation was, how thin the margin between success and catastrophe. They needed help, and White was the obvious person to go get it. The day White departed, August 27th, the mood in the settlement was mixed. Relief that someone was going to bring help, anxiety about being left with reduced leadership, sadness at seeing the governor leave so soon after arrival, hope that he would return quickly with the supplies and reinforcements they desperately needed. Eleanor Dare stood on the shore with other colonists, holding baby Virginia, watching her father's ship move away. She'd lived at Roanoke for just over a month, had given birth here, had begun making a home in this strange new land. Now her father was leaving, promising to return, promising everything would be better. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that help was coming, but she also felt the weight of uncertainty, the knowledge that so much could go wrong between now and his promised return. The ship disappeared beyond the horizon, and the colonists returned to their settlement, to their work, to their daily struggle for survival. They were 114 people now, one fewer with White's departure, alone on an island off the coast of a vast continent, surrounded by peoples they didn't understand, dependent on help from a country thousands of miles away. They would need to survive until White returned. They believed they could. They believed help was coming. They believed that by next summer, everything would be better. They had no idea that White's return would be delayed for 3 years. They had no idea how much can change in 3 years, how many things can go wrong, how many ways a small, vulnerable colony can fail. They had no idea that they were living the last documented days of their lives. That history would remember them not for what they built, but for how they vanished. Not for their success, but for their mysterious, complete, and utter disappearance. John White's departure. The voyage back to England was faster than the outbound journey had been, aided by favorable winds and currents, taking perhaps 2 months rather than 3. White spent the time writing reports, making lists of supplies the colony needed, planning how he would present the situation to the sponsors and authorities who controlled funding and support for the Virginia colony. He was optimistic still, believed the problems were solvable, that with proper support, the colony would overcome its difficulties and establish itself permanently. The colonists were capable, hard-working, committed. The land was fertile once you learned how to work it. Relations with natives could be improved with patience and fair dealing. What was needed was more people, more supplies, more tools, and time for the colony to take root and grow strong. White arrived in England in November 1587, 5 months after leaving Plymouth, returning to a country he barely recognized. In his absence, tensions with Spain had escalated dramatically. King Philip II of Spain was assembling a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, with the explicit purpose of invading England, crushing the Protestant nation, returning it to Catholic rule. Every ship in England was being prepared for this conflict. Every able-bodied man was being recruited for defense. Every resource was being directed toward the coming battle. White's plans to organize a relief expedition for Roanoke immediately ran into these larger concerns. No one was interested in sending ships to America when those ships were needed to defend England. No one would fund an expedition when every penny was needed for military preparations. No investors wanted to risk ships and cargo on a transatlantic voyage when Spanish fleets might intercept them at any moment. White pleaded his case, argued that the colonists would die without support. that England's investment in the Virginia colony would be lost if relief didn't come soon. But his arguments fell on deaf ears. The colonists at Roanoke were 115 people. England itself was millions. The arithmetic was simple. England came first. Roanoke would have to wait. In April 1588, White managed to secure 2 small ships, convinced their owners to risk the voyage to America. He loaded them with supplies and a few additional colonists, prepared to return to Roanoke, to bring the help he'd promised. The ships departed, sailed west, made it only a short distance before encountering French privateers. In the battle that followed, the ships were damaged, supplies were lost, and the captains decided to abandon the voyage and return to England for repairs. White was devastated. His daughter, his granddaughter, all the colonists were waiting for him, depending on him, and he couldn't reach them. He tried to organize another voyage, but by now it was May 1588, and the Spanish Armada was approaching. Every ship in England was commandeered for the national defense. No vessel would be permitted to sail for any purpose except defending the realm. The Great Battle came in July and August 1588. The Spanish Armada entered the English Channel, a fleet of 130 ships carrying nearly 30,000 men, the largest naval force ever assembled. England met them with smaller, faster ships, with superior gunnery, with the advantage of knowing their own coastal waters. The battle raged for days, up the Channel, around the English coast, ending with the Spanish fleet shattered, many ships sunk or driven onto rocky shores, the invasion defeated. England celebrated, rejoiced in the victory, saw it as proof of God's favor, of Protestant righteousness, of English superiority over Spanish might. But for John White, the victory was bitter. Yes, England was saved, but the crisis had delayed his return to Roanoke for another year. The colonists had been promised help in spring 1588. It was now autumn 1588, and he was no closer to reaching them than he'd been when he first arrived back in England. Through the winter of 1588-89, White continued his efforts, but peacetime brought no relief from his difficulties. Ships that had been reserved for defense were now available for commerce, were being dispatched to trade with Europe, were carrying cargo and passengers to dozens of destinations, but none were going to Roanoke. The investors who'd funded the original colony had lost money, were reluctant to throw more money at what looked like a failed venture. Without new investment, without willing ship captains, without support from authorities, White could do nothing but wait and hope. The year 1589 passed, with White trapped in England, unable to help the colonists, unable even to send word that relief was coming, that they hadn't been forgotten, that England still cared about their survival. He thought constantly about his daughter, about his granddaughter, who would now be 2 years old, walking and talking and growing up on that island without him. He thought about all the colonists, wondered if they had enough food, if they'd survived the winters, if attacks from hostile natives had killed some or all of them, if disease had swept through the small population, if they blamed him for abandoning them. The guilt was crushing, made worse by his inability to do anything about it. He'd promised to return quickly. He'd failed. It wasn't entirely his fault. The Spanish Armada had been beyond his control, but he'd still failed. He'd left them, and now he couldn't get back to them. And with each passing month, their situation grew more desperate, their chances of survival dimmer. Finally, in early 1590, White found a ship willing to attempt the voyage. Actually, he found privateers, pirates essentially, who were sailing to the Caribbean to raid Spanish settlements and who agreed to stop at Roanoke on the way. It wasn't ideal. Privateers were more interested in plunder than rescue, but it was the only option available. White accepted their terms, climbed aboard, and in March 1590, nearly 3 years after leaving Roanoke, he finally set sail to return to the colony. The voyage to the Caribbean was successful from the privateers' perspective, capturing Spanish ships and goods. But it took time, months of sailing and raiding, and it wasn't until August 1590 that they finally approached the outer banks of North Carolina, approached Roanoke Island, approached the settlement White had left behind 3 years earlier. 3 years. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed. When he'd left, Virginia Dare had been just days old. Now she would be 3 years old, no longer an infant, but a child. His daughter Eleanor would have seen seasons pass, would have endured winters and summers, would have struggled and survived, or perhaps not survived. The colonists would have changed, would have adapted or failed, would have news to tell, stories to share, experiences to relate. White stood on the deck of the ship as it approached the coast, his heart pounding, his emotions a mixture of hope and fear and desperate need to know. What had happened to the people he'd left behind? Would they be angry at the delay? Would they understand that he'd tried, that circumstances had prevented his return? Would they even still be there? The ship navigated through the channels, entered Roanoke Sound, approached the island. White strained to see the settlement, to spot the buildings, to see smoke from fires, to see any sign of life. The ship drew closer, close enough to make out the shoreline, close enough to see the trees, close enough to see nothing. No movement, no smoke, no boats on the shore, no people visible. Just forest and beach and silence. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The return journey. 1590. The date was August 15th, 1590, when White's ship entered Roanoke Sound and began approaching the island. It was late afternoon, the sun lowering in the west, casting long shadows across the water, turning the sound golden with reflected light. The weather was calm, the water barely rippling, conditions perfect for landing and beginning the search for the colonists. But perfect weather couldn't dispel the growing sense of dread that settled over White as the ship drew closer and the settlement remained invisible, remained silent, showed no signs of the life and activity that should have been there. A functioning colony of more than 100 people should have been obvious from the water. Smoke from cooking fires, boats on the shore or in the water, buildings visible above the tree line, people moving around, voices carrying across the sound. There was none of that. Just forest, just beach, just silence broken only by birdsong and the gentle lap of water against the hull. The ship couldn't approach too close because of shallow water, so a boat was lowered and White climbed in with several sailors, began rowing toward shore. The approach seemed to take forever, each oar stroke bringing them closer to answers White both desperately needed and desperately feared. What would they find? Where were the colonists? Why was everything so quiet? As they rowed, White noticed something on the northern end of the island. A thin column of smoke rising from the trees, dissipating in the still air. His heart leapt. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. People meant the colonists were alive, were there, were safe. Perhaps they'd moved the settlement to a different location. Perhaps they were at the other end of the island. Perhaps everything was fine, and he'd been worrying for nothing. The boat reached the shore, and White jumped out, splashed through the shallow water, ran up the beach toward where the smoke was rising. The sailors followed, calling out, trying to get White to slow down, to be careful, to not rush blindly into unknown situations. But White couldn't slow, couldn't be cautious, needed to reach that smoke, needed to find his daughter and granddaughter and all the colonists. He pushed through the underbrush, following the smoke, calling out, announcing his presence, expecting at any moment to hear answering voices, to see people emerging from the trees, to be greeted and welcomed and told the stories of the 3 years he'd been gone. He reached the source of the smoke, a clearing where a fire was burning or had been burning recently. But the fire was wild, uncontrolled, burning grass and brush, clearly not a cooking fire or signal fire, but rather just a forest fire that had started somehow and was slowly spreading. There were no people, no camp, no signs that anyone had lit this fire deliberately. White stood in the clearing, breathing hard from his run, looking around, seeing nothing but forest and fire and emptiness. The smoke he'd seen, the smoke that had given him hope, was just a natural fire, meaningless, irrelevant to his search. He returned to the boat, told the sailors what he'd found, and they agreed to circle the island, to look for the settlement from the water, to find where the colonists had gone. They rowed along the shore, searching, calling out, seeing nothing but forest and beach, hearing nothing but their own voices echoing across the water. As the sun set and darkness fell, they gave up for the day, returned to the ship, anchored for the night. White couldn't sleep, stood on deck staring toward the dark island, thinking about where the colonists might be, about what might have happened, about his daughter and granddaughter somewhere in that darkness, either alive and waiting or dead and gone forever. The next day, August 16th, they tried again. This time they approached the northern end of the island, where White knew the settlement should be, where the fort and buildings should have been easily visible from the water. As they drew closer, White began to make out structures through the trees, saw the palisade wall still standing, saw buildings within the fort. Relief flooded through him. The settlement was still there. The buildings stood. Perhaps the colonists were simply away, were out working in fields, or had gone to visit friendly native groups, would return soon, and everything would be explained. The boat reached shore, and White practically fell out in his haste, splashed through the water again, ran toward the settlement. Behind him, the sailors followed more cautiously, weapons ready, alert for danger. They'd seen no people yet, and that continued to trouble them, even if it didn't slow White's headlong rush. White reached the palisade, saw that the entrance gate was open, not broken, but simply standing open as though whoever had left hadn't bothered to close it behind them. He passed through, entered the fort, looked around at the settlement he'd left 3 years earlier. The buildings were still standing but showed obvious signs of abandonment and neglect. Roofs had leaked and in some cases partially collapsed. Walls showed damage from weather and decay. Vegetation had invaded, vines growing up walls, grass and weeds covering what had been clear ground. The whole place looked like it had been abandoned for months or even years, left to slowly return to the forest. But there were no bodies, no signs of violence, no evidence of attack or massacre. The place was simply empty, as though everyone had walked away one day and never come back. White moved through the settlement, checking each building, looking for his daughter's house, looking for any sign of where the colonists had gone, what had happened to them. Most buildings were empty, cleared of personal possessions, furniture removed or broken down. A few items remained: a broken chest, some rusted tools, a shoe too worn to be worth taking. In the center of the fort, at the entrance to what had been the main meeting area, stood a wooden post, taller than a man, driven firmly into the ground. Carved into this post, cut deeply into the wood with letters several inches high, was a single word: CROATOAN. White stared at the carving, his mind racing. CROATOAN was the name of a nearby island, about 50 miles south of Roanoke. It was also the name of a native tribe, the same tribe that had been friendly, or at least not hostile during White's time there, the tribe he'd tried to establish good relations with. Had the colonists gone to CROATOAN Island? Had they integrated with the CROATOAN tribe? Was this carving meant to tell him where to find them? He looked around for more clues. On a tree near the palisade entrance, he found another carving, just the letters CRO cut into the bark. Clearly the carvers had intended to write CROATOAN, but had been interrupted or had decided the partial word was sufficient. The colonists had left a message, had told him where they'd gone. Relief mixed with continued worry. They were at CROATOAN, or at least that's where they'd intended to go. But when had they left? Were they still there? Were they alive? The carvings told him where to look, but not what he would find when he looked. White had previously agreed with the colonists on a signal. If they needed to leave Roanoke, they would carve their destination into a prominent place. And if they were leaving under duress, under attack, or in danger, they would carve a Maltese cross above the message. White examined both carvings carefully, saw no cross, no sign of distress. The message was clear, unadorned, suggesting the colonists had left voluntarily, had chosen to relocate rather than being forced out. This gave White hope. A voluntary relocation suggested they'd planned carefully, had taken their possessions, had arranged to join the CROATOAN, had made a rational decision about improving their survival chances. They might be fine, might be thriving, might simply be waiting for him to find them and see that they'd adapted, had found a better situation than the isolated fort on Roanoke. White returned to the ship, told the captain what he'd found, urged that they sail immediately to CROATOAN Island to search for the colonists there. The captain was willing, but noted that weather was deteriorating, that storms were approaching, that sailing in these coastal waters could be dangerous. They would try, but couldn't guarantee success. Over the next 2 days, the ship attempted to reach CROATOAN Island, but weather and winds were against them. Storms came through, forcing them to seek shelter. When they tried to approach CROATOAN, currents and shoals made navigation treacherous. The ship's anchors were lost in the difficult conditions, and without anchors, the captain said they couldn't safely stop at the island, couldn't land and search. The captain made a decision. They would sail to the Caribbean to resupply, to acquire new anchors, and would return to search CROATOAN after resupplying. It would take a few weeks at most, and then White could complete his search, could find the colonists, could finally reunite with his daughter and granddaughter. But the resupply voyage went badly. Storms drove them far off course. The ship was damaged and needed extensive repairs. By the time they reached port and made repairs, winter was approaching, and the captain refused to sail back north into storm season. He would return White to England, and White could organize another expedition the following year to complete the search. White argued, pleaded, begged. He was so close. CROATOAN Island was just a few days' sail from where they were. The colonists were there. He was certain of it. Just a few more days and he could find them, could bring them back to England or arrange for supplies to be sent to them, could complete the mission he'd started 3 years earlier. But the captain was immovable. The privateers had completed their raiding, had taken enough Spanish ships to make the voyage profitable, were ready to go home. White was a passenger, had no authority to command the ship, could only accept the decision and hope for another chance. In November 1590, White returned to England, having seen Roanoke but not found the colonists, having read the message CROATOAN but not been able to search that island, having come so close to answers only to have them slip away due to weather and timing and a captain's unwillingness to take additional risks. He never returned to America. He tried to organize new expeditions, tried to find sponsors willing to fund a search, but no one was interested. The colony had failed. The colonists were presumed lost. Investors had no reason to throw more money at a disaster. White's pleas fell on deaf ears. Year after year, he hoped for another chance, but no chance came. John White died in 1593, just 3 years after his failed return to Roanoke, never knowing what happened to his daughter, to his granddaughter, to the colonists he'd promised to help. He died with the word CROATOAN burned into his memory, died wondering what that message meant, died hoping that somewhere the colonists lived, that his family survived, that the story had a better ending than he'd been able to discover. The mystery of the lost colony was complete. More than 100 people had vanished, leaving almost no trace except those mysterious carved words. They'd been gone when White returned, and no one has ever definitively determined where they went, what happened to them, whether they survived or perished, whether they integrated with native tribes or met some other fate. The mystery endures to this day, more than 4 centuries later, one of American history's most compelling unsolved puzzles. The search and theories. In the centuries since the Roanoke colonists disappeared, countless theories have been proposed about their fate. Archaeologists, historians, anthropologists, and amateur researchers have all examined the evidence, such as it is, and offered explanations ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. Yet no theory has been proven, no definitive answer has emerged, and the mystery remains as deep as ever. The most straightforward theory, is that the colonists did exactly what their message suggested. They relocated to CROATOAN Island. This island, now known as Hatteras Island, was about 50 miles south of Roanoke, was inhabited by the CROATOAN tribe, was more accessible to shipping lanes, had better resources for fishing and agriculture. Moving there would have made logical sense if the Roanoke settlement was proving unsustainable. This theory suggests the colonists integrated with the CROATOAN people, intermarried, had children, and gradually lost their distinct English identity. Some evidence supports this. Later European explorers reported meeting native peoples in the area who had grey eyes or light hair, unusual traits among purely native populations, possibly indicating mixed English-native ancestry. Some CROATOAN oral traditions spoke of English people living among them, though these traditions were recorded centuries later and may have been influenced by knowledge of the Lost Colony story. If the colonists did relocate to CROATOAN and integrate with the tribe, it would explain why no evidence of violence was found at Roanoke, why possessions seem to have been packed and taken rather than abandoned, why the message was left clearly and without signs of distress. It would also explain why subsequent searches found no trace of the colonists. They'd become part of another community, had adopted native ways of living, had ceased to exist as a distinct English group. But this theory has problems. If the colonists integrated so successfully, why didn't they send word to later English expeditions? Why didn't some colonist, or their children, or their grandchildren, make contact with the English settlements that were established in Virginia in the early 1600s? Surely someone would have wanted to reconnect with English civilization, to tell their story, to ensure they weren't forgotten. Another theory suggests the colonists attempted to return to England on their own. Perhaps they grew tired of waiting for whites' return, built or obtained boats, and attempted the Atlantic crossing. This would have been incredibly dangerous, probably suicidal, but desperate people make desperate choices. If the colonists attempted this and failed, perishing at sea, it would explain their complete disappearance, why no trace was ever found, why no evidence exists of what happened to them. But this theory seems unlikely. Building or obtaining boats capable of Atlantic crossing would have been nearly impossible without proper resources. The colonists were farmers and craftsmen, not shipwrights. They had limited tools, limited knowledge, limited materials. Even if they'd managed to build boats, the likelihood of successfully crossing the Atlantic was essentially zero. And if they'd attempted it, surely they'd have left more evidence at Roanoke, more abandoned materials, more signs of boat construction. A darker theory proposes that the colonists were killed either by hostile native tribes or by Spanish raiders from Florida. The Spanish certainly knew about the English presence at Roanoke, certainly saw English colonization as a threat to their own territories, certainly had the means and motive to eliminate the settlement. A Spanish attack could have wiped out the colony, with survivors perhaps being taken captive or killed, evidence of the attack subsequently covered up or erased by time and weather. But again, evidence is lacking. No mass grave has been found. No Spanish records acknowledge an attack on Roanoke. No native oral traditions clearly describe such a massacre. The orderly condition of the abandoned settlement, with its message carved clearly and without signs of panic, doesn't suggest violent destruction. People fleeing an attack don't stop to carve messages. They run, they hide, they fight, they die. But they don't take time to communicate their destination to rescuers who might arrive years later. Some theories propose environmental disaster, drought, disease, or starvation. Perhaps the colonists' crops failed repeatedly. Perhaps they couldn't catch enough fish or gather enough wild foods. Perhaps they slowly starved, their population declining until none remained. Disease could have swept through the small group, killing adults and children, leaving no one alive to tell the story. But these theories don't explain the missing bodies, the missing possessions, the clear message about relocation. Starvation or disease would have left corpses, would have left possessions scattered, would have left a settlement that looked like a place where people died rather than a place they deliberately left. More speculative theories propose that the colonists traveled inland, up rivers, into the interior of North America, seeking better land, better resources, better relationships with native peoples. Some researchers claim to have found artifacts far from the coast that might be associated with the lost colony. English-style buildings in native villages, European trade goods in unusual locations, oral traditions of white people living among various inland tribes. These theories are difficult to prove or disprove. Native peoples of the era traveled extensively, traded over long distances, interacted with each other in complex ways that Europeans barely understood. European goods could have reached inland areas through native trade networks without any English people traveling there. Oral traditions can be unreliable, can confuse different time periods, can incorporate European stories heard later rather than recording actual events from the 1580s or 1590s. The reality is that we may never know what happened to the lost colony. The evidence is simply too sparse, too ambiguous, too degraded by time and weather and the natural processes that erase human traces from the landscape. The colonists vanished into a world that Europeans barely understood, among peoples whose histories were primarily oral and have been largely lost, in an era when record-keeping was sporadic and communication across the Atlantic was uncertain and slow. What we know for certain is limited. The colonists were at Roanoke in August 1587. They were gone by August 1590. They left a message saying CROATOAN, and they were never definitively seen or heard from again. Everything else is speculation, theory, educated guessing based on incomplete information and the assumptions we bring to the question. Perhaps the mystery is part of what makes the Lost Colony story so compelling. It's a puzzle that can never be solved, a question with no answer, a story with no ending. It reminds us how much of the past is lost, how many people have lived and died without leaving traces we can read, how history is made up not just of what we know, but of vast silences, vast unknowns, vast spaces where people existed but left no permanent mark. The colonists of Roanoke were real people with real lives. They had names, histories, families, dreams. Eleanor Dare held her infant daughter, Virginia, looked around at the settlement they were building, imagined a future in this new land. Ananias Dare worked on construction, laid bricks and tiles, created structures that he believed would stand for generations. The other colonists, whose names we know from the passenger lists, but about whom we know almost nothing else, lived their days, did their work, hoped their hopes, and then vanished so completely it's as though they never existed. But they did exist, and somewhere, somehow, their story ended. We just don't know how. Drifting to sleep. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of this journey, this voyage into one of history's most enduring mysteries, this story of people who vanished so completely that even now, more than 4 centuries later, we cannot say with certainty what became of them. The lost colony of Roanoke remains lost, and perhaps it always will be, a question mark carved into American history as deeply as the word CROATOAN was carved into that wooden post. Let your body relax now, sinking into your bed, into your pillows, into the comfort and safety of your own space. Let your breathing slow, become deep and regular, the steady rhythm of rest approaching, of consciousness beginning to ebb like a tide going out, leaving behind only peace and quiet and the gentle darkness of sleep. The colonists of Roanoke have been gone for more than 400 years now. Whatever happened to them, whatever fate they met, it happened so long ago that everyone involved is dust. Their bones return to the earth, their stories ended. The fear they might have felt, the hardships they endured, the struggles they faced, all of that is finished, past, done. Only the mystery remains, and even that is just an intellectual puzzle now, not a human tragedy. not a source of pain for anyone still living. Your breathing slows further, your thoughts drifting like smoke, formless and flowing, one idea dissolving into another, memories and imaginings blurring together until you're not quite sure what's real and what's dream, what's history and what's story. The lost colony floats through your mind like a ship on calm water, present but distant, interesting but not urgent, something to think about but not something to worry over. Think about the island of Roanoke as it is today. Peaceful, quiet, part of North Carolina's Outer Banks, visited by tourists who walk the trails and look at historical markers, who try to imagine what it was like when the colonists were there, who take photographs and buy souvenirs, and then drive away to their hotels and restaurants and comfortable modern lives. The tragedy is long past. The island is just an island now, beautiful and peaceful. The mystery just a story told to visitors, not a present reality. You're very relaxed now, your body heavy, barely feeling the bed beneath you, the boundaries between you and the world growing indistinct. You're floating, drifting, like a boat on still water, rocking gently, supported completely, safe and comfortable and at peace. The story of the lost colony recedes, becomes background, becomes just another tale among all the tales you know, interesting but not troubling, mysterious but not frightening. Perhaps the colonists did relocate to CROATOAN, did integrate with native peoples, did survive and have children and grandchildren who still walk the earth, who carry English and native blood in their veins, who don't even know they're descended from those vanished settlers. Perhaps the story has a happy ending after all, just one we can't quite see, can't quite prove, can't quite bring into focus through the mist of centuries. Or perhaps the ending was sad, was tragic, was the kind of thing that happens when people venture into unknown lands, with too little preparation and too few resources, and too much confidence in their ability to overcome nature's challenges. Perhaps they died, whether quickly or slowly, whether together or scattered, whether peacefully or in pain. But even if that's true, it was long ago, and their suffering is ended, and whatever pain they felt has faded into the past, like morning fog burned away by the sun. Sleep is very close now, right at the edge of awareness, ready to take you, gentle and inevitable as nightfall, as sure as the tide, as soft as a breath released. Your eyes are closed, have been closed, will stay closed. Your body is completely relaxed, every muscle loose, every tension released. You're not quite awake anymore, but not quite asleep either, suspended in that perfect space between, floating in comfort, supported by darkness, wrapped in peace. One more breath, one more moment of drifting, one more gentle release of the day's concerns and thoughts and worries. The lost colony is lost, but you are found. You are here, in this moment, in this bed, safe and warm and comfortable. History happened, mysteries remain, but you are in the present, in the now, in the space where sleep waits patiently to receive you. Let go completely now. Release everything. Sink into sleep as gently as a leaf settling onto still water, as softly as snow falling on a winter night, as naturally as the tide returning to the shore. Dream softly if you dream at all. Rest deeply whether dreams come or not. Let the story of Roanoke settle into memory. Join all the other stories. Become just another thread in the rich fabric of history you carry in your mind. Tomorrow, you will wake refreshed, rested, ready for your own day, your own life, your own story that continues forward while the lost colony remains forever frozen in 1587, forever mysterious, forever lost. But tonight you sleep, tonight you drift, tonight you let go of questions that have no answers, mysteries that cannot be solved, stories that will never have endings. Good night, dear listener. Sleep peacefully, rest completely, and know that wherever the colonists went, whatever happened to them, their story, is part of human history now, is woven into the great collective memory of who we are and where we came from, and all the brave, foolish, hopeful things we've attempted as we've spread across this planet. If you found peace in this journey through mystery and history, if this story helped guide you toward restful sleep, please consider liking this video. Subscribe to travel with me through more forgotten times and unsolved mysteries, through history told gently, told for rest, told to help you drift into dreams. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what other mysteries you'd like to explore, what other historical moments you'd like to revisit, what other stories call to you from the past. Until next time, sleep well, dream softly, and remember that some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries, that some questions have no answers, that some stories have no endings, and that's all right. We can wonder without knowing, can imagine without proving, can tell stories about what might have been without ever discovering what actually was. The lost colony remains lost, and perhaps that's how it should be. Some things are better left to imagination, to possibility, to the eternal question mark that makes history interesting, rather than just a collection of known facts. Good night, sleep deeply, and may your own story be clear and certain, even as you drift through dreams of mystery and fog, and people who vanished long ago into the American wilderness, leaving behind only their names and a single carved word and the enduring question, what happened to them? The answer is lost to time, but you need not search for it tonight. Tonight, you simply sleep.